Are we living less because of our phones?
There's a moment in Shadow of a Doubt where a girl named Charlie starts to suspect her uncle might be a murderer. She hears about it on the radio and soon notices her uncle is hiding a part of the newspaper. Suddenly, she has to know what he's hiding. So she runs out of the house, races across town. A car almost hits her, nearly misses the library before it closes, and frantically digs through stacks of newspapers. And after that exhilarating race across town, she eventually finds the ugly truth.
This story would have been dramatically different if Charlie had a smartphone in her hand.
In fact, that whole adventure never would have happened, as she probably would have just laid in bed and found her answers via some internet sleuthing.
Today, our smartphones can do almost everything, but as more and more life moves into one device, it feels like we've lost a bit of that depth and texture that once came from doing things the long way.
It's hard to imagine now, but the phone didn't always follow us everywhere. For a long time, the telephone sat in the center of the home, tethered to a wall in the entryway or kitchen. It was your connection to the outside world, waiting silently until its bells rang and demanded your attention. And it wasn't one per person like today. It was one per household if you were even lucky enough to have one at all. By the early 1950s, only about half of American homes did. The rest, they just figured it out. You borrowed a neighbor's, walked down to a local store, or used a public phone. Life didn't stop without one, you just had to improvise a little. But even if your family had a phone, it still wasn't really yours. It was a shared object, something the whole house used. So when the phone rang, you answered it there in the open. There was no disappearing into another room, no pacing around privately, gossiping to a friend. The cord only stretched so far, and chances are someone else was within earshot. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't just your household listening. There was something called a party line, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Multiple homes, sometimes up to a dozen, all connected to the same line. So this means if someone was already on the phone, you had to wait. And if you were talking, there was always a chance someone else was quietly listening in. This technically wasn't supposed to happen, of course. There were unspoken rules, as this article from 1957 reminded readers, stating, quote, "Never interrupt, never give in to the temptation to listen in, and allow some time between calls so others have a chance to use the line." If it was urgent, people were expected to hang up, but of course, people didn't always follow the rules. And this did cause tension. One columnist vents her frustration, writing, quote, "About 10 a.m., Miss Inexperienced sat down at her telephone, and for 1 hour and 10 minutes, she called this friend and that, chatting busily with each one about nothing particular. It dawned on me that she was quite oblivious to the fact that she was completely monopolizing the party line. It was a system you had to, here's that word again, shared with a whole lot of people. It required patience, awareness, and yes, even a little bit of discipline. I haven't even discussed yet what it was like placing a call in the first place. Compared to what we know today and looking back, these phones took some effort. There was no saved contacts or quick searches. You either had the number memorized, written down somewhere, or you had to go find it. Usually you'd find your answers in the once very popular Yellow Pages. And if you didn't know the number at all, there was still one more option. You could just pick up the receiver and ask an operator, a real person that was always on the line 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the early days, phones were very simple, and you couldn't even place a call yourself because the dials didn't exist yet. So every connection had to physically be made by someone else waiting on the line, which was the operator who would physically plug your line in and out to route your call where it needed to go. And that operator, she wasn't just connecting calls. No. She was like a superhero. She could help you find a number, reach a doctor, give you an address, or even the time of day. In fact, before emergency numbers like 911 existed, she was often the first person people turned to in a crisis. There's a story from 1951 where a telephone operator heard, quote, the sound of a gasp followed by the thud of a falling body. Sensing something was wrong, she alerted officials and ended up saving 2 lives. In many cases, people even knew their operator personally. She knew your family, she recognized your voices, and understood your routines. And even as dialing became more common, people didn't rush to give up the operator. In some places, operator-assisted services survived all the way into the early 1990s. And when you actually use one of these phones today, you feel the difference immediately. It was slower, more physical. You dialed each number at a time, waiting for the wheel to spin back. If you messed up, you couldn't just hit backspace, you had to start all over. But man, I can't get enough of how that sounds. And when the call ended, that was it. You hung up, you left the phone where it was, and you went back to your life. It didn't follow you, it didn't buzz in your pocket, it didn't pull you back in every 5 minutes later. It just did its job and then faded back into the background.
Let's take a second to think about everything our phones do. It's our camera, our calendar, our flashlight, our wallet, our music player, our social life, our source of entertainment. It's literally everything. But believe it or not, there once was a time when the phone did exactly one thing. It just made calls.
And because of that, everything else in life had to exist somewhere outside of it. The moment you stepped out your front door, you were on your own. Whatever you needed, people, information, entertainment, you had to go out into the world to find it. And people did. If you look at photos of American city centers before the internet, before smartphones, the streets are packed. Not just because people were busier, it was because there was no other option. Life didn't exist in a box. It was something you physically stepped into, and that included your social life. If you wanted to see people, you went where people were. Soda fountains, movie theaters, street corners, the sandlot, arcades, spaces where you'd interact with your friends or whomever happened to be there. These are what we would call third places. And one of the biggest of those were dance halls. And no, it wasn't a club or a bar like how you may be thinking. It was something different. These were places where young people, entire communities would gather regularly, weekend after weekend. They were in huge open rooms with loud music and packed floors. You'd meet people, spend hours there, fall in love, dance until your legs gave out, sometimes quite literally. There was a dance marathon from 1932 that lasted over 750 hours. They set up cots so people wouldn't have to leave. At one point, 2 dancers even got married right there in the middle of the dance floor. That's how central these spaces were. This wasn't something happening through a screen. You saw it unfold in front of you in real time. The conversations, relationships, drama, it happened right in front of you. And when spaces like that start to disappear, something else goes with them. People spend less time around others they don't know. There's less small talk and casual interaction. Fewer of those everyday moments where you're just around different kinds of people. In my opinion, when that goes away, people can feel isolated and more divided. And it wasn't just your social life that lived outside your phone. Even something as simple as remembering a moment took intention. If you wanted a photo, for example, you had to remember to bring your camera. And even then, you didn't just take pictures of everything. You couldn't. A roll of film gave you maybe 24, 36 shots if you were lucky, and that's it. And you wouldn't even see what they looked like until days later after they were developed. Every picture cost something, which meant every picture mattered. There are entire moments in history that exist through just a handful of images because of that. Take the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. One of the most important pieces of evidence from that day comes from a single home movie, the Zapruder film. there's really only one solid angle of that tragic moment because people weren't walking around trying to document every single moment of their life. They were really just there to see JFK with their own eyes. If you imagine that same moment today, maybe it wouldn't be a mystery of who did it. We'd get the full 360 because everybody would be viewing the whole thing through their phones. And yet we take more photos now than ever before. Tens of thousands every second. And because we have this need to feel like we have to capture everything, it gets harder to tell what actually matters. And then there's even something more personal that we've lost. Writing. If you couldn't talk on the phone or if it just wasn't practical, you wrote a letter. Something handwritten and personal. Maybe a few pages, just a little sweet note, but it meant you had to stop, sit down, actually think about what you wanted to say and physically write it out. You would send it off and patiently wait for a response. During World War II, letters became a lifeline. Historian and veteran Paul Fussell explains that for soldiers overseas, letters were often the only real connection to home. By 1945, the U.S. postal system was handling more than 2.5 billion pieces of mail a year, and many of those letters would be saved for decades. Seeing one's unique handwriting and their imperfections, the fact that somebody physically sat down and made it. I mean, I've seen letters of my family members kept for decades, and it really does feel very profound and intimate, as it was a piece of their life. And now, I don't even know if kids write down anything beyond their own name. And little by little, the things that once made us feel deeply human became unnecessary.
So how in the world did we get here? The phone used to be just something that sat in the hallway, and now it's something that we carry with us everywhere and use for almost everything.
I think we can zero in on this guy. In 1973, an engineer named Martin Cooper stepped out onto a street in New York City and made the first mobile phone call. He was calling a rival company just to rub it in their face and prove it could be done. They referred to it as a takeaway phone. You could make a call on your way home, riding horseback, or even fishing in the middle of a lake. And they assured people that, quote, you didn't need a license to operate. Now, this phone wasn't exactly practical. It was humongous, weighing in at about 2 pounds, took hours to charge, and you only got 30 minutes of talk time. And if you wanted one back then, it cost you almost $4,000. Today, a whopping $11,000. So this wasn't for the average person. It was mostly for business people or anybody who needed to be reachable at all times. But things progressed quickly. By the late 90s, phones were getting smaller, cheaper, and a lot more common. And for the first time, you could send a message without calling someone, though most people still weren't texting yet. And then phones started to pick up new roles. They added games, morphing it into something that could entertain you. 1997 introduced the snake game. The objective being if you let your snake hit the wall, the game was over. This created the thumb generation. In 2002, Nokia hosted a 2,700-person snake game competition. It was such a sensation that kids were actually using their thumbs as the prominent finger, as people began to notice that kids were ringing doorbells with their thumbs. Researchers even found that thumbs were jacked, finding that they were, quote, more muscled and dexterous. Then, soon after, you could take the blurriest pictures possible with your Nokia. Now your phone could capture moments too. People like Brian Bernstein wondered, though, what was the point of having a camera connected to your phone? Asking, quote, do you ever really wish your camera had a phone? It would be great if my computer could heat up last night's leftovers, but I'll survive if there's never a Microsoft microwave, unquote. And all this really snowballed into more and more and more. In the early 2000s, devices like the BlackBerry pulled even more into one place. Your messages, email, and practically your whole work life now lived in your pocket. You didn't have to wait until you got home or sat down at a computer anymore. And then, in 2007, the world watched this man walk onto a stage holding a funny little rectangular contraption and declared to the world, quote, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone," promising what he introduced wasn't just a better phone. Apple co-founder Steve Jobs presented it as a multifaceted machine. He explained that it was, quote, "an iPod, a phone, are you getting it? These are not three separate devices, this is one device." And today, the momentum has not stopped. I mean, you barely even have to think with AI now being built into our phones, among other things. Your phone can now type out those long, complicated breakup messages for you. And before you know it, like a Pac-Man chomping across the screen, the phone ate up everything imaginable.
Believe it or not, I am actually old enough to get to experience what life was like without a smartphone constantly glued to me. I didn't get my first phone until high school. So for instance, in elementary school, if I wanted to reach out to one of my friends, I either had their phone number memorized or I looked up their number in the little school telephone directory and I sat in the kitchen, called them up, asked if they were home. It's just like those old movies. Life took a little bit more effort, but that's what made it an adventure, right? Half the time, I pick up my phone and I'm not even consciously aware of it. I mean, just 1 second of boredom and boom, that puppy is right in my hand. It's the first thing I check in the morning and it's the last thing I put down at night. And if I leave the house without it, I literally feel like I'm missing an arm and leg. I don't even feel safe without it. But humanity did exist without a telephone for thousands of years. And even when the telephone was just a telephone, it existed on the side. It existed more so in the background. Now we can't live without it. You know, I can't help but wonder what it would be like to just have things be a little bit more simple sometimes. You know, just to leave that phone in the corner instead of in my hand 24/7. To maybe save a story to tell in person instead of posting it online per se. Because if so much life is happening through a screen now, I can't help but wonder, are we living less because of our phones?